Welcome to my video blog. I'm Rick Rabe, a part-time pastor in the United Methodist Church with 42 years of IT background. I found that being a quarter-time posting makes it pretty difficult sometimes to get the job done. So I'm going to share through some of these video sessions how we can use a little bit of technology to both enrich the experience for our congregation, reach out to more people, and maybe not be so busy all the time. Today's session we're going to talk about how to build a video kiosk using some pretty expensive pieces of equipment so that you can have a display in your church narthex or in the fellowship hall that keeps people up to date about the happenings of the church. You've seen them everywhere. They're displays that might advertise new products. At the airport you'd see them for posting your canceled flights. And so today I'm going to show you how to take just a few small components that are pretty inexpensive and turn that into a easily updated, remotely accessible kiosk to keep your congregation informed. Let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need to acquire will be some form of a television or a monitor. Now the good news is you don't need something gigantic or expensive. The one I'm showing here is just a 24-inch television that I picked up for about $80. Now you may find anything from 24 to 32-inch that would work really well. And you might find out that some people in your congregation, perhaps their kids have left for college and they left that old flat screen lying around. Perhaps they have upgraded their television to something like a giant 50 or 70 or who knows, diagonal monitor. And so you might find yourself being the recipient of a donated television. Now the important thing to note when you're looking for a donation or looking to buy one is that the TV have two things. One, a working remote. This is going to be important because during the rest of the week you might want to just use this power off button to turn it off. And the second thing you're going to want to do is make sure that it has one of these ports. You'll see it right here. That is an HDMI port. You can even see that it's labeled HDMI, and it might not be labeled clearly, might be covered up, but it looks something like that. And it should say HDMI in, but that's the critical part that you're going to need in order to turn this television into a video kiosk. A lot of modern computer flat screens also have HDMI input, so if that's also an option that you might want to look at. Now there are some parts that you're going to need, and most important of all is going to be this tiny little computer. Now I'm using one that I got off of Amazon, which you'll see in the reference, called an X96 Mini. This particular unit costs about $33, and let's take a look and see what it really is comprised of before we go any further. You can see that it's just about 3 inches by 3 inches by only a ½ inch thick. Ideally, with this computer, what we're going to do with this is we're going to end up pasting it onto the back of that television. But there's some important things you need to see. Remember we talked about having an HDMI port, and in fact this X96 has an HDMI. It also has an Ethernet port for wiring in to your church network. Equally though, it has a Wi-Fi connection, so you don't have to worry about that. Power supply. 2 ports here, and they'll become important in a moment because we're going to use these 2 USB ports to temporarily plug in a keyboard and a mouse during the setup. Also comes with a power supply, the HDMI cable we're going to need, and in fact it comes with its own remote that you can use to turn it on and off or change the apps once it's in place and has been set up. Alright, the other things that you might want to have handy as we get started, as I had mentioned, you're going to need some kind of a keyboard. And the keyboard has to have a USB port on it. That's important. It's also going to be helpful if you have a mouse. Again, this has to be a USB mouse, so it has to have an end to it. You also might want to have a little bit of this lying around. I use industrial strength Velcro. We're going to use a little tiny piece of this just to attach the X96 to the back of the computer or TV monitor. And then last, I went ahead and since we're going to want to mount these things, the other thing that might be kind of important is to have a mounting bracket for that television that you're going to use. And that's an important thing to note. If you are going to mount this on the wall, the other thing you have to make sure of is that the TV that you are given or purchase actually has the ability to be mounted on the wall. So what you need to look for on the back of the TV are 4 holes. These are mounting holes. You can see them right here. And these will line up with these variable holes that are on this bracket so that you can do a mounting right on the wall and get rid of the stand that the computer comes with, the TV comes with. So as you can see here, I've got all of the materials laid out in front of us. I've added an Ethernet cable. You might need this. It depends on your network. If you have a wired network at the church, you're going to end up needing an Ethernet cable of the appropriate length, and it will be plugged into the Ethernet port here. Today I'm going to show you how to set it up without the Ethernet cable, because most of us have Wi-Fi and it's a lot easier. So I've got all the parts that I need, and I'm going to start putting them together. I'm going to take the HDMI cable that came with the X96 Mini, take these plastic parts off, put them in recycling. That part is going to get plugged into the X96 HDMI port, just like that. I'm going to take my mouse and the USB port, find my USB ports on the Mini. It doesn't matter which of these I'm going to plug it into. I'm going to plug my mouse into there. I'm going to take the keyboard and its USB cable. And again, it doesn't really matter, but there's only one port left since I plugged in the mouse. And it can only go in one way. Alright, we're almost set. The last step that I have for getting this ready is I'm going to plug in the power supply to where it says 9V for 9 volts. Alright, our X96 is almost ready. Now we're going to take our X96 and go back to our television, take the other end of the HDMI cable, and plug that right here, right into the HDMI port. Again, it can only go one way, so don't try and force it. Okay, we're all set. We've got everything set up. We've got the X96 plugged into the television. We've got our keyboard. We've got our mouse. The only thing we have left to do is to turn on the television and plug in the X96. So I'm just going to power up our television. Don't worry, it's telling us that we don't have a signal. Yours might not have exactly this display, but it'll be something similar. And if you selected the right HDMI port, if there's more than one, you'll have a display that you might have no display at all, in which case you'll have to change the source on your selection. But here you can see this is the startup display for the computer as it comes online. Pretty flashy. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take our mouse and we're going to go over here to settings and click. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to get our network set up. And as you can see, we have a variety of networks available. Now, if you had plugged this in to a wired network, it would automatically be online and you wouldn't have to do this. Now, I'm setting this up at my home, which means that when I take this to church, this step I'll have to do again in order to get it connected to the Wi-Fi at church. But it's a one-time event. So I'm just going to connect to my home network. That is our setup. And I right-click on the mouse and I'm back to settings. We're not going to be playing any sound, but we'll go ahead and leave this on in case we decide that maybe we have a film or something that we want to put out there. Okay, we're going to go down here to date and time. We want to make sure that we set the date and time to where we are. I'm going to look for New York is Eastern Time. And we're going to let it use the network to provide the time. The last thing that you may want to do is add your Google account. Now this is important because it will allow us to get into Google Play and get the apps that we need for this kiosk to function. If you don't have a Google account, you can't do that. So you have to create it. You can create a Google account using your existing password, but I would also encourage you to instead to use either a new account or use the church admin account, so that if you get reassigned or leave from this facility, they will have access to it and it won't be tied to you. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my Google account. Alright, so that pretty much is all that we have to do to set up the system, and it's now ready to run. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually load some apps. And we do the app load by going to the Google Play Store. And there's 3 apps that we need to get to put on this device. So the first app that we're going to want to get is called Dropbox. Dropbox allows us to, it's a cloud storage, and it allows us to work from home, put files out into a folder, and have access to those files without having to bother with things like USB drives or anything else. This auto sync app video kiosk. You'll see that little kiosk symbol knowing that you're getting the right one. It's really a great tool, simple. So we're going to download that. Alright, that is all for now as far as what we need to add